The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Petaluma, California, as Matthew Zane rode into town with his two silent children. The year was 1873, and like the weathered lines on his face, the weight of the past 3 years hung heavy on his shoulders. Not a single resident who witnessed their arrival missed the hollow look in his eyes, or the protective way he positioned himself between his young ones and the rest of the world. 10-year-old James and 8-year-old Sarah sat rigid on their shared mount, their faces solemn mirrors of their fathers. The townsfolk would later whisper that those children hadn't laughed since their mother passed during the influenza outbreak that had swept through the mining camps north of Sacramento. "Pa, are we staying here?" James asked, his voice barely audible over the creaking of leather saddles and the distant piano from the saloon. "For now," Matthew replied, his voice gruff from disuse. He hadn't been much for conversation since Elizabeth died, preferring instead the company of his own thoughts and the occasional necessary words with his children. The trio made their way to the modest boarding house at the edge of town. Miss Pritchard, the elderly proprietress, took one look at the family and knew tragedy when she saw it. She'd seen it often enough in this unforgiving land. 2 rooms, Matthew stated flatly, placing coins on the counter. 1 for me, 1 for my children. "Of course, Mr. Zane." Matthew Zane. "Well, Mr. Zane, supper's at 6. Don't be late or you'll miss it entirely." She handed him 2 keys, her eyes softening when they fell on the children. "Poor little things," she murmured, though not quite softly enough. Matthew's jaw tightened. He didn't need pity, especially not in front of James and Sarah. "We'll manage just fine," he said curtly, ushering his children up the narrow staircase. That night, after settling the children in their room, Matthew sat alone on his bed, the moonlight casting silver patterns across the worn floorboards. He pulled out the folded advertisement that had brought him to Petaluma, an opportunity to manage a small cattle operation outside of town for a businessman who'd relocated to San Francisco. It wasn't much, but it offered stability, something his children desperately needed after 3 years of drifting from one mining camp to another. Morning came with the promise of a fresh start. Matthew left the children with Miss Pritchard while he rode out to meet his prospective employer's representative. The meeting was brief but successful. The pay was fair, and the position came with a small cabin on the property. They could move in immediately. "Children need a mother," the foreman commented as they shook hands on the deal. Matthew's expression hardened. "My children have me, that's enough." 2 days later, they were settled in their new home. The cabin was simple but solid, with 2 small bedrooms, a main living area with a stone fireplace, and a kitchen with an iron stove. It sat nestled among a grove of oak trees, a quarter mile from the main ranch house where the foreman lived. Life fell into a routine. Matthew would rise before dawn, prepare a simple breakfast for the children, and then ride out to oversee the ranch hands. James and Sarah spent their days doing lessons from their mother's old books or exploring the immediate surroundings of the cabin. When Matthew returned in the evenings, they would eat a quiet meal together before he tucked them into bed with a brief, "Sleep well." There were no bedtime stories, no games, no laughter, just the methodical progression of days, each one bleeding into the next. It was on a particularly hot day in July when Willow Kane arrived in Petaluma. The stagecoach rolled to a stop in a cloud of dust, and she emerged like a breath of fresh air. At 26, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced hardship and emerged stronger for it. Her chestnut hair was swept up in a practical style, but a few rebellious tendrils had escaped to frame her face. She wore a sensible traveling dress of blue cotton, neither fancy nor shabby, just like the woman herself. Willow had come to Petaluma at the request of her late brother's wife, Catherine, who had written of her struggle to manage both her general store and her newborn son. The letter had reached Willow in St. Louis, where she had been working as a schoolteacher since the end of the war. Having lost her parents during the conflict and with no immediate family left in Missouri, Willow had seized the opportunity for a fresh start in California. "Willow, oh, thank goodness you've come," Catherine exclaimed, rushing forward to embrace her sister-in-law. The baby in her arms fussed at being squeezed between the women. "Let me see my nephew," Willow said, her face softening as she gazed at the infant. Little Thomas had his father's eyes, her brother's eyes, and the sight of them brought a momentary pang of grief. But Willow had long ago learned that grief and joy often walked hand in hand, and she allowed herself to feel both as she cradled the baby. The following weeks were a whirlwind of adjustment. Willow moved into the small apartment above Catherine's store and quickly proved herself invaluable both as an aunt and as a shopkeeper. Her natural warmth and genuine interest in people made her popular with customers, and her organizational skills helped bring order to Catherine's chaotic bookkeeping. It was during her third week in Petaluma that Willow first encountered Matthew Zane. He entered the store with his children trailing silently behind him. The contrast between the handsome, stern-faced man and his subdued children immediately caught her attention. "Good morning," she greeted cheerfully. "What can I help you with today?" Matthew glanced up, momentarily startled by the unfamiliar voice. "Just supplies," he said gruffly, handing over a list. As Willow gathered the items on his list, she noticed the little girl staring longingly at a display of colorful hair ribbons. Moving with deliberate casualness, Willow selected a blue ribbon that matched the child's eyes. "This would look lovely in your hair," she said, kneeling down to the girl's level. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The child looked up at her father, as if seeking permission to speak. Matthew gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Sarah," the girl whispered. "Well, Sarah, I'm Miss Kane, but you can call me Willow if you'd like. Would you like to try this ribbon?" Before Sarah could respond, Matthew interrupted. "We don't need any ribbons, just the supplies." Willow straightened, meeting his gaze directly. "Every little girl needs at least one pretty ribbon, Mr. Zane, and we'll stick to what's on the list." Something in his tone, not anger but a deep, protective caution, made Willow step back. "Of course, Mr. Zane. I'll have your order ready in a moment." As she moved away, she heard the boy whisper, "Pa, can't Sarah have just one ribbon?" "Not today, James," came the quiet reply, and Willow thought she detected a note of regret beneath the firmness. When Matthew paid for his supplies, Willow deliberately included the blue ribbon in his package. "No charge for that," she said when he noticed. "Consider it a welcome gift from the store." For a moment she thought he might refuse, but then Sarah looked up at him with such hope that his resolve visibly wavered. "Thank you," he said stiffly before ushering his children out. That evening, as Catherine nursed baby Thomas, Willow mentioned the encounter. "The Zanes." "Yes, they moved here about a month ago," Catherine confirmed. "Matthew Zane took over managing the Carson Ranch. Tragic story, his wife died during that influenza outbreak up north. They say he hasn't smiled since. And the children? Sweet things, but so quiet, nothing like children should be." Catherine sighed. "The local busybodies have already started their matchmaking schemes. A widower with children is prime territory, you know, but he's rebuffed every attempt to introduce him to eligible ladies." Willow frowned. "Those children need more than just a replacement mother. They need joy in their lives." The next Sunday, Willow spotted the Zane family at church. They sat in the back pew, Matthew rigid and uncomfortable in his Sunday best, the children equally stiff beside him. When the service ended, Willow made her way over. "Good morning, Mr. Zane. Hello, James." "Hello, Sarah." She smiled warmly at each of them. "I was wondering if perhaps Sarah and James might like to join my Sunday school class. We meet right after service for an hour." Matthew's instinct to refuse was written plainly across his face, but Sarah tugged gently at his sleeve. "Please, Pa." She whispered. James, ever protective of his sister's happiness, added, "We haven't had proper schooling in a while, Pa. Might be good for us." Conflict played across Matthew's features. Finally, he nodded. "1 hour, we'll wait outside." Willow's Sunday school class was unlike anything the Zane children had experienced. While she certainly taught Bible stories, she did so through interactive games, songs, and activities that had the children fully engaged. By the end of the hour, James had answered several questions, and Sarah had almost but not quite smiled when she successfully recited a short verse. When Matthew collected them, Willow approached him directly. "Your children are bright and well-behaved, Mr. Zane. They're a credit to you." He acknowledged the compliment with a slight nod. They take after their mother. It was the first personal information he had volunteered, and Willow recognized it as the tiny opening it was. "I'd be happy to have them in my class every Sunday. And if they ever need additional schooling during the week, I have experience as a teacher. I handle their education," he stated flatly. "Of course," Willow conceded, seeing his defenses rise again. "The offer stands nonetheless." Over the following weeks, a cautious pattern emerged. Each Sunday, Matthew would bring the children to church and allow them to attend Willow's class. Each Sunday, she would engage him in brief conversation afterward, never pushing too hard but refusing to be deterred by his terse responses. During one such conversation, when the children were out of earshot, Matthew surprised her. "They look forward to your class all week," he admitted. "It's good to see them interested in something. They're wonderful children, Mr. Zane. They deserve to experience joy." His expression darkened. "Life isn't always joyful, Miss Kane. Best they learn that early." "With all due respect," Willow replied gently, "I believe they've already learned that lesson all too well." Their eyes met, and for a moment the barrier he maintained so rigorously seemed to waver. Then he looked away. "We should be going. Thank you for your time with them." August turned to September, and the routine continued. Every few days, Matthew would bring the children to the general store, and Willow would make a point of engaging them in conversation. She learned that James was fascinated by maps and had a talent for drawing. Sarah loved stories about animals and had once had a pet rabbit before they'd left their previous home. Little by little, the children began to open up. James would occasionally smile at Willow's jokes, and Sarah would whisper questions about the books in the store. But the moment Matthew appeared, they would retreat back into their shells, as if afraid that showing happiness might somehow upset him. One rainy afternoon, Catherine approached Willow as she arranged a new shipment of books. "I've had an idea," she said, bouncing Thomas on her hip. "The Harvest Festival is coming up next month. We always need volunteers to run the children's games. I think you'd be perfect for it." Willow considered this. That could be fun. But what does it have to do with Matthew Zane? Catherine finished with a knowing smile. "Don't think I haven't noticed your interest in him and those children." The festival committee is desperate for help, and the ranch hands from Carson's place always participate in the competitions. Matthew will have to be there to oversee them. "I'm not scheming to trap the man, Catherine," Willow protested, though her cheeks flushed. "I just worry about those children." "Just the children?" Catherine raised an eyebrow. "He's intriguing," Willow admitted reluctantly. "There's depth to him behind all that gruffness, but he's built walls so high I'm not sure anyone can scale them." "Well, the festival might be your chance to at least peek over those walls." "Will you volunteer?" Willow agreed, though she insisted to herself it was primarily for the children's sake. The opportunity to spend more time around their enigmatic father was merely a secondary consideration, or so she told herself. The following Sunday, after class, Willow mentioned the festival to James and Sarah. "There will be games and contests, apple bobbing, and even a small carousel brought in from San Francisco," she explained, watching their eyes widen with interest. "Will there be prizes?" James asked, the most animated she'd ever seen him. "All sorts of prizes," Willow confirmed. "And I'll be running the children's games area. I would love to see you both there." "Can we go, Pa?" Sarah asked as Matthew approached. "Please," Matthew hesitated, clearly reluctant. "We'll see," he said, which both children correctly interpreted as a probable refusal. Seeing their crestfallen expressions, Willow decided on a bolder approach. Mr. Zane, I understand the ranch hands from Carson's place traditionally participate in the festival competitions. As their manager, won't you be required to attend? Matthew's eyes narrowed slightly, recognizing her strategy. The men can manage themselves for one day. But Pa, James interjected, Mr. Carson himself will be there. He's coming up from San Francisco special, remember? You said we had to make a good impression. Caught in his own logic, Matthew could only nod stiffly. We'll attend briefly, he conceded, but only because duty requires it. The day of the harvest festival dawned clear and crisp. Petaluma's town square had been transformed overnight, with colorful banners, hay bales for seating, and stalls offering everything from candied apples to handmade quilts. A small stage had been erected for musical performances, and the promised carousel stood proudly at the center of it all. Willow had been up since dawn, helping to organize the children's area. She wore a pretty dress of forest green that complemented her eyes, with her hair partially down and secured with a tortoiseshell comb. Though she told herself it was merely festival attire, she had taken unusual care with her appearance that morning. The Zane family arrived shortly before noon. Matthew looked uncomfortable in the crowd, but he'd made an effort with his appearance. His usually wind-tousled dark hair was neatly combed, and he wore a clean shirt with his best vest. The children, by contrast, looked excited despite their attempts to remain reserved. Miss Kane. Sarah called out when she spotted Willow, then immediately ducked her head as if embarrassed by her own enthusiasm. Willow waved them over. I'm so glad you came. The children's games are about to begin. Would James and Sarah like to participate? Before Matthew could object, both children nodded eagerly. With a resigned sigh, he gave his permission. I need to check in with Carson and the men. I'll be back shortly. Take your time, Willow assured him. They're in good hands. The children's games began with sack races, followed by an egg and spoon relay. To everyone's surprise, Quiet James proved to be fiercely competitive, winning his age group in both events. Sarah, though less athletic, threw herself into each activity with such earnest determination that she won the hearts of all the onlookers. When Matthew returned an hour later, he found his children transformed. James's face was flushed with the excitement of victory, a small ribbon pinned proudly to his shirt. Sarah, her hair coming loose from its careful arrangement, was actually giggling as she tried to toss rings over bottlenecks. He stopped short, watching them from a distance. They looked so much like they had before Elizabeth died, carefree, joyful, alive. A sharp ache spread through his chest. They're having a wonderful time, Willow said softly, appearing beside him. Matthew couldn't speak for a moment. When he finally did, his voice was rough with emotion. I haven't heard Sarah laugh in 3 years. Willow's heart contracted at the raw pain in his voice. Children are resilient, Mr. Zane. They can find joy again if given the chance. And what about their father? The question seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. Before she could respond, Sarah spotted him and ran over, her face alight with excitement. Pa, I won a prize. She held up a small cloth doll. And James won ribbons, did you see? Matthew knelt down to his daughter's level, something Willow had never seen him do before. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Miss Willow helped me with the ring toss. She says I have a good eye. Does she now? Matthew glanced up at Willow, something indefinable shifting in his expression. Indeed I did, Willow confirmed. Your daughter is quite talented. The afternoon continued in a similar vein. Matthew was called away several times to oversee the ranch hands in various competitions, but he always returned to check on his children. With each return, he found them more animated, more engaged, more like the children they should have been all along. As the day wore on, Willow was freed from her duties and joined the Zane family. She suggested trying the carousel, and though Matthew initially hesitated, the pleading looks from his children wore down his resistance. I'll watch from here, he said, positioning himself near the operator. Nonsense, Willow challenged. There's room for all of us. Something in her tone, not quite teasing, but gently insistent, made it difficult for him to refuse. Soon, the four of them were mounted on wooden horses that rose and fell to the cheerful music of the carousel's organ. Sarah squealed with delight as her horse climbed higher, while James pretended nonchalance despite the gleam of excitement in his eyes. Matthew, seated on a horse between his children, looked distinctly uncomfortable until Sarah's laugh rang out again. Willow, positioned on a horse across from him, saw the moment something shifted in his expression. The stern set of his mouth softened, and for just an instant, the ghost of a smile touched his lips. That evening, as the festival began to wind down, the town gathered for a communal supper at long tables set up in the square. The Zane family found themselves seated with Willow, Catherine, and baby Thomas, and several other townspeople. The conversation flowed around Matthew, who contributed little beyond polite responses when directly addressed. But Willow noticed that he seemed less tense than usual, and he didn't immediately refuse when offered seconds of apple cobbler. As twilight deepened and lanterns were lit throughout the square, a small band began playing. Couples moved to the cleared area before the stage, and the dancing began. "Dance with me, Pa?" Sarah asked suddenly, tugging at Matthew's sleeve. The request visibly startled him. Elizabeth had been the one who danced with the children, spinning them around their small cabin while he watched from his chair, content in his family's happiness. He hadn't danced since her death, hadn't even considered it. "I don't dance anymore, Sarah," he said quietly. The light dimmed in Sarah's eyes, but she nodded with the resignation of a child accustomed to disappointment. "That's all right, Pa." Willow, witnessing the exchange, stood and extended her hand to Sarah. "Would you dance with me instead, Miss Sarah? I could use a partner." Sarah's face brightened immediately. "Yes, please." As Willow led Sarah to the dancing area, James looked up at his father. "Ma loved dancing," he said, the first time he had voluntarily mentioned his mother in Matthew's presence in nearly 2 years. "She did," Matthew agreed, his throat tight. "She was very good at it. She said you were good too, even though you pretended not to be." Matthew looked at his son in surprise. "She said that," James nodded. "She said you just needed the right partner to bring it out in you." Out on the makeshift dance floor, Willow was spinning Sarah in careful circles, the little girl's laughter floating back to them on the evening breeze. Something stirred in Matthew's chest, an emotion he'd thought long buried with Elizabeth. "Your ma was right about many things," he finally said. When Willow and Sarah returned, breathless and smiling, Matthew surprised everyone by standing. "Miss Kane, would you honor me with the next dance?" Willow's eyes widened, but she recovered quickly. "I would be delighted, Mr. Zane." As he led her to the dance floor, Matthew felt strangely nervous. "I'm out of practice," he warned. "I'm sure it will come back to you," Willow said, "like riding a horse." The band struck up a waltz, and Matthew tentatively placed his hand at Willow's waist. As they began to move together, the years seemed to fall away. His body remembered the steps, the rhythm, the give and take of partnership. Willow followed his lead perfectly, her eyes never leaving his face. "You're a natural, Mr. Zane," she said softly. "Matthew," he corrected, surprising himself again. "If we're dancing together, you might as well use my given name." "Matthew," she repeated, and he found he liked the way it sounded in her voice. "Then you must call me Willow." They danced in silence for a few moments before Matthew spoke again. "My children are different around you. Children respond to kindness and attention. They're wonderful, Matthew. They just need permission to be children again." "And what about their father?" he asked, echoing his earlier question. "What does he need permission for?" Willow held his gaze steadily. To live again, perhaps. To remember that grief isn't the only emotion worth feeling. The music ended, but they remained standing close together until the band started up again with a livelier tune. Matthew stepped back, feeling exposed in a way he hadn't in years. "Thank you for the dance," he said formally, then escorted her back to the table. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur. When it was time to leave, Matthew found himself reluctant to end the day. The children were tired but happy, a state he hadn't seen them in for so long that he had almost forgotten what it looked like. "Thank you for making today special for them," he said to Willow as they prepared to part ways. "It was my pleasure." She hesitated, then added, "The children mentioned they haven't been to school since. For some time. My offer to help with their education still stands." Matthew considered this. The children needed more than he alone could give them today had made that painfully clear. "Perhaps we could discuss it further. Maybe you could come to the cabin for supper one evening this week." The invitation surprised both of them. Matthew hadn't entertained a guest since Elizabeth's death. "I would like that very much," Willow replied, her smile warming him more than it reasonably should have. 3 days later, Willow arrived at the Zane cabin with a basket of fresh bread and a small bouquet of wildflowers. Sarah greeted her with barely contained excitement, while James tried to maintain his composure despite the gleam in his eyes. Matthew welcomed her with a nod, his expression guarded but not unwelcoming. The cabin was spotlessly clean, though Willow noted touches that revealed the absence of a woman's hand, the practical but unadorned furnishings. The lack of any decorative items save for a single framed photograph on the mantel. During the simple but hearty meal, conversation flowed more easily than Matthew had anticipated. Willow had a gift for drawing people out, asking questions that invited more than one-word answers and sharing anecdotes of her own that made even James laugh outright. After the meal, when the children were occupied with washing the dishes, Willow and Matthew sat by the fire. He found himself telling her about his plans for expanding the Carson operation, ideas he hadn't shared with anyone else. She listened attentively, asking intelligent questions that showed genuine interest rather than mere politeness. When the topic turned to the children's education, Matthew was more receptive than he'd expected to be. 3 afternoons a week, then, he agreed to Willow's proposal. "They can come to town after my morning rounds and I'll collect them before supper." "That would be perfect. We can use the back room at the store. Catherine has already agreed." As the evening drew to a close, Matthew walked Willow to her buggy. The autumn air was crisp and the stars shone with remarkable clarity. "Thank you for coming," he said. "The children enjoyed it immensely." "And their father?" Willow asked, her voice gentle in the darkness. Matthew hesitated, then admitted, "Their father did as well." In the weeks that followed, a new routine emerged. 3 afternoons a week, James and Sarah attended lessons with Willow. Their progress was remarkable, their natural intelligence flourishing under her guidance. On Sundays, they eagerly participated in her class, then often invited her to join them for a simple picnic lunch afterward. Matthew found himself looking forward to these encounters with an intensity that sometimes unsettled him. Willow was unlike any woman he'd known, including Elizabeth. Where his late wife had been gentle and somewhat reserved, Willow possessed a quiet strength and an unwavering optimism that had somehow begun to penetrate the walls around his heart. One afternoon in late October, Matthew arrived at the store earlier than usual to collect the children. Hearing their voices from the back room, he paused in the doorway, unnoticed by the room's occupants. Willow sat between James and Sarah, a book open before them. But it wasn't the lesson that caught Matthew's attention, it was the sound of his children's laughter, bright and unreserved. Sarah was practically doubled over with giggles as Willow dramatically acted out a scene from the story, while James made a valiant but failing attempt to maintain his composure. "And then," Willow continued, her voice comically deep, "the old bear said, 'Who's been sleeping in my bed?'" This sent both children into fresh peals of laughter. Matthew couldn't remember the last time he had heard such uninhibited joy from them. The sound created a peculiar ache in his chest, a mixture of gratitude and regret so powerful that he had to brace himself against the doorframe. The movement caught Willow's eye and she looked up. For a moment their gazes held and Matthew saw something in her expression that mirrored his own complicated emotions. "Pa," Sarah exclaimed, noticing him at last. "Miss Willow is telling us Goldilocks but doing all the voices. It's so funny." "So I hear," Matthew said, his voice rougher than he intended. "You two sound like you're having a good time." "The best time," James confirmed, and the simple sincerity in his son's voice nearly undid Matthew completely. That night, after the children were asleep, Matthew sat alone by the dying embers of the fire. He held Elizabeth's photograph in his hands, studying the face that had once been as familiar to him as his own. He had loved her deeply, completely, and when she died, he had believed that part of him died with her. But today, watching Willow with his children, he had felt something he thought long extinguished flicker back to life. The realization brought with it a crushing wave of guilt. "I don't know what to do, Lizzie," he whispered to the photograph. "The children need her. They're coming back to life around her, but I never thought I'd feel this way about anyone but you." Only silence answered him, but as he stared at Elizabeth's smiling face, he remembered something she had said during her final days. "Promise me you won't bury yourself with me, Matt. Promise me you'll find happiness again." He had promised, though at the time he'd had no intention of keeping that promise. It had seemed impossible, unthinkable. Yet here he was, 3 years later, with his heart stubbornly insisting on beating for someone new. The following Sunday, after church, Matthew surprised Willow and the children by suggesting they take their picnic to the creek that ran through Carson's property. "It's a pretty spot," he explained. "Elizabeth and I used to take the children there before." He trailed off, but Willow understood the significance. This was the first time he had voluntarily shared a memory of his late wife. The creek was indeed beautiful, with ancient oak trees providing dappled shade and a small sandy beach where the water curved gently. The children immediately set about exploring, leaving the adults to arrange the picnic. "This is the first time you've mentioned your wife to me," Willow said quietly as they spread a blanket on the ground. Matthew nodded, watching his children skip stones across the water. "It's been easier not to talk about her. Easier for me, at least. I'm not sure it's been easier for them." "Grief is personal," Willow said. "There's no right way to handle it." "What about you?" Matthew asked suddenly. "Have you ever lost someone you loved?" Willow's hands stilled on the blanket. "My brother Nathan. He was killed at Shiloh. We were very close. He practically raised me after our parents died." She paused, then added, "And my fiancé, Robert. Yellow fever took him just before we were to be married." Matthew looked at her with new understanding. "Yet you still managed to find joy in life." "Not right away," she admitted. "For a long time I was just going through the motions. Teaching helped, focusing on the children, seeing their excitement when they learned something new." She smiled faintly. "And one day I realized I was laughing again, genuinely laughing. It felt like a betrayal at first, being happy when they were gone. But then I thought, wouldn't they want that for me?" Elizabeth said something similar, Matthew confessed. "Before she died, she made me promise I wouldn't bury myself with her. Those were her exact words." "Wise woman," Willow said softly. "She would have liked you," Matthew said, the words surprising him as they left his mouth. But he knew they were true. The picnic was a success. They ate cold chicken and fresh bread, followed by apple tarts that Willow had brought from Catherine's kitchen. Afterward, Matthew astonished the children by removing his boots and rolling up his trousers to wade in the creek with them. When Sarah splashed him, he feigned outrage and splashed her back, eliciting a shriek of delight. Willow watched from the bank, her heart full to bursting at the sight of this stern, somber man playing with his children like a child himself. When he caught her eye, something passed between them, a moment of shared joy, of recognition, of possibility. The days grew shorter and colder as November arrived. Matthew found increasingly frequent excuses to visit the general store, often lingering to talk with Willow long after his purchases were complete. The townspeople noticed, of course. Gossip was the primary entertainment in a place like Petaluma, and the growing attachment between the handsome widower and the lovely schoolteacher provided ample fodder. Catherine observed the developing relationship with satisfaction. "I've never seen Willow so happy," she told her husband one evening, "and those children are blooming like flowers after a drought. And Zane himself? Her husband asked. The man was a walking gravestone when he first came to town. Still reserved, Catherine acknowledged, but there's life in his eyes now. You should see how he looks at her when he thinks no one's watching. As Thanksgiving approached, Catherine organized a small dinner party and made sure to include the Zanes. Matthew initially declined the invitation, but when James and Sarah learned of it, their disappointment was so evident that he reconsidered. The evening proved to be a turning point. In the warm, convivial atmosphere of Catherine's home, surrounded by new friends and with Willow seated beside him, Matthew found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years. When the meal was over and the other guests were engaged in animated conversation, he turned to Willow. "Would you care for some air?" he suggested. "It's getting rather warm in here." They slipped out onto the porch where the night air was crisp but not unpleasantly cold. Stars punctuated the clear sky and a sliver of moon provided just enough light to see by. "Your children are thriving," Willow said after a comfortable silence. "Sarah recited an entire poem from memory yesterday, and James's mathematics skills are remarkable." "Thanks to you," Matthew acknowledged. "You've brought something back to them that I couldn't provide." "You've provided everything essential: safety, stability, love. I've just added a little levity." "More than a little," Matthew said, his voice low. "You've reminded them how to laugh. You've reminded me," he broke off, uncertain how to continue. Willow turned to face him, her eyes searching his in the dim light. "Reminded you of what, Matthew?" "That there might be more to life than just enduring it." He took a deep breath. "Willow, I need to be honest with you. I have feelings for you, feelings I wasn't sure I was capable of anymore." "I don't know if I feel the same," she interrupted softly. "I have for some time now." Matthew stepped closer, hesitantly raising a hand to touch her cheek. "I'm not an easy man, Willow. Grief changed me. I'm not sure I'll ever be as free as I once was." "I don't need you to be what you once were," she replied. "I care for the man you are now, complicated history and all." Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Matthew lowered his head and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was gentle, tentative, the kiss of a man relearning a language he thought he had forgotten. When they parted, Matthew rested his forehead against hers. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," he admitted. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" Willow asked, a hint of vulnerability in her voice. "Terrifying," he said honestly. "But good, definitely good." As winter settled over Petaluma, Matthew and Willow's relationship deepened. He began courting her properly, calling on her at Catherine's home, escorting her to church socials, and bringing small gifts that showed he paid attention to her preferences: a ribbon in her favorite shade of green, a book by an author she had mentioned enjoying. The children watched this development with growing excitement. Sarah, especially, had become attached to Willow, often begging to visit her at the store or inviting her to the cabin for supper. James was more reserved in his enthusiasm, but his behavior spoke volumes. He had taken to showing Willow his drawings and asking her opinion on his ideas, something he had previously done only with his mother. One evening in early December, after Willow had joined them for supper and was helping Sarah prepare for bed, Matthew overheard a conversation that stopped him in his tracks. "Miss Willow," Sarah was saying, her voice carrying clearly through the partially open bedroom door, "do you think you might be our new mother someday?" Matthew froze in the hallway, his breath catching in his throat. There was a brief pause before Willow answered. "That's a very important question, Sarah. What makes you ask?" "Because you make us happy, and you make Pa happy too. He smiles now sometimes when he looks at you. He didn't smile much anymore after Mama died, but now he does." "I see," Willow said, her voice gentle. "Well, that would be a decision for your father to make, but I want you to know that I care very deeply for all of you. Even if you don't become our mother, will you still teach us and visit us?" Sarah pressed. "Of course I will," Willow assured her. "No matter what happens between your father and me, my feelings for you and James won't change." Matthew backed away quietly, his mind reeling. He retreated to the porch, where the cold night air helped clear his thoughts. A few minutes later, Willow joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "Sarah's asleep," she informed him. "She wanted me to read her another chapter, but I told her it was getting late." Matthew nodded, then said, "I overheard what Sarah asked you." Willow's cheeks flushed. "I hope my answer was appropriate. I didn't want to presume anything or make promises I couldn't keep." "It was perfect," he assured her. Then, gathering his courage, he added, "And it's made me realize I need to clarify my intentions." "Oh." Willow's voice was carefully neutral, but he could see the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Taking her hands in his, Matthew looked directly into her eyes. "I love you, Willow. I didn't expect to love anyone again after Elizabeth, but here we are. You've brought light back into our lives, all of our lives. The children adore you, and I can't imagine my future without you in it." Tears welled in Willow's eyes. "Matthew, I'm not asking you to make a decision tonight," he hurried on, "but I wanted you to know where I stand. When the time is right, when you're ready, I hope to make our arrangement more permanent." Willow squeezed his hands. "I love you too, Matthew, and I love James and Sarah as if they were my own. I don't need more time to know what I want." Matthew's heart seemed to stop, then restart at a gallop. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying yes," she confirmed, a smile breaking through her tears. "Whenever you decide to ask properly, my answer will be yes." He pulled her into his arms then, kissing her with all the emotion he'd held in check for so long. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I still miss her," he confessed. "I always will." "I know," Willow said. "I would never expect otherwise. Elizabeth will always be a part of your life and a part of James and Sarah. That's as it should be." "How did I get so lucky twice in one lifetime?" Matthew wondered aloud. "Perhaps it's not luck," Willow suggested. "Perhaps it's exactly what was meant to be." Christmas that year was a celebration unlike any the Zane family had experienced since Elizabeth's death. The cabin was decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons. A small tree stood in the corner, adorned with paper ornaments the children had made with willow. And the atmosphere was one of anticipation rather than resignation. On Christmas Eve, after attending the special service at church, Matthew gathered everyone around the fireplace. James and Sarah exchanged puzzled glances when he asked them to sit together on the sofa while he and Willow remained standing. "Children," Matthew began, his voice more emotional than they were used to hearing, "I have something important to ask Willow, and I wanted you both to be part of it." Sarah's eyes widened with sudden understanding while James sat up straighter, a cautious hope dawning on his face. Matthew turned to Willow and took her hands in his. "Willow Kane, you came into our lives when we needed you most, though we didn't even know it. You've taught my children to laugh again. You've taught me to live again." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "Would you do us the honor of becoming a permanent part of our family? Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Willow's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, with all my heart." Before Matthew could even place the ring on her finger, a simple gold band with a small pearl. Elegant rather than ostentatious, Sarah launched herself at Willow with a cry of joy. James followed more sedately, but his face showed a happiness that had been absent for too long. "Does this mean we can call you Ma now?" Sarah asked excitedly. Willow looked to Matthew, who nodded his approval. "If you'd like to," she told Sarah, "but only when you're ready. I know I can never replace your mother." "You don't have to replace her," James said, surprising them all with his insight. "We can love you both. Ma would want that." Matthew's eyes grew damp at his son's words. "Your mother would indeed want that," he confirmed. "She would be very happy for us right now." That night, after the children were asleep, Matthew and Willow sat by the dying fire, his arm around her shoulders as she leaned against him. "I never thought I'd be here again," he mused, "planning a wedding, thinking about the future." "Life has a way of surprising us," Willow agreed. "When I came to Petaluma, I was just hoping to help Catherine and find a quiet place to build a new life. I never expected this." "When do you want to get married?" Matthew asked. "Spring would be practical, better weather for travel if you want to invite friends from back east." "I don't need a big wedding," Willow assured him. "Just you, the children, and a few close friends would be perfect, and I don't want to wait until spring." Matthew raised an eyebrow. "How soon were you thinking?" "New Year's Day," she suggested. What better way to start the year than as a family? Matthew considered this. "That's barely a week away, are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," Willow said firmly. "Unless you need more time," Matthew shook his head. "A week is perfect." He paused, then added with a hint of his rare humor, "Though Catherine might never forgive us for the rushed preparations." Willow laughed. "Leave Catherine to me, she'll understand." True to Willow's prediction, Catherine was initially aghast at the timeline but quickly rallied to the cause. "A New Year's wedding, how romantic! We'll make it work somehow." The preparations were simple but heartfelt. The ceremony would take place in the church, followed by a reception at Catherine's spacious home. Word spread quickly through Petaluma, and soon offers of help poured in. Mrs. Jenkins would bake the cake. The Miller sisters would provide flowers from their hothouse, and Mr. Peterson, the town's best fiddle player, volunteered his services for the dancing afterward. 3 days before the wedding, Matthew took James aside for a man-to-man talk. "Are you truly happy about this, son, about Willow becoming part of our family?" James considered the question with the seriousness that characterized him. "I am, Pa. She's good for us, all of us. And she doesn't try to make us forget Ma. Some of the ladies in town, when they talk to us, they never mention Ma like they're afraid to. But Willow asks about her sometimes, wants to know what she was like." Matthew's throat tightened. "Your mother would approve of her." "I know," James said simply. Then with unexpected perceptiveness, he added, "You don't have to feel bad about being happy again, Pa. I don't think Ma would want that." Matthew pulled his son into a rare embrace. "When did you get so wise, James Zane?" "Must have gotten it from my pa," James replied with a small smile. On New Year's Day, 1874, the church was filled to capacity as Matthew Zane waited at the altar for his bride. James stood proudly beside him as best man, while Sarah, resplendent in a new dress with the blue ribbon in her hair, waited to escort Willow down the aisle. When the music began and Willow appeared at the back of the church, Matthew felt his heart stop. She wore a simple gown of ivory silk, her hair adorned with small white flowers. She was radiant, but what struck him most was the love shining in her eyes as she looked at him. The ceremony was brief but moving. When they exchanged vows, Matthew's voice was steady and sure, the voice of a man who had known great loss but had found the courage to open his heart again. Willow's responses were equally certain, her voice clear and strong as she promised to love not just Matthew but his children as her own. As the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Sarah could contain herself no longer. She let out a whoop of joy that startled the congregation into laughter and then threw her arms around both Willow and her father. James joined them a moment later, and the four stood together, a family once broken now made whole again. The reception was everything a frontier celebration should be: abundant food, lively music, and genuine goodwill from the entire community. Matthew, who had avoided such gatherings for so long, found himself caught up in the festive atmosphere. When Willow pulled him onto the dance floor for their first dance as husband and wife, he went willingly, even eagerly. "Look at your father," one townswoman remarked to James as they watched the couple. "I've never seen him smile like that." James nodded, his own expression reflective. "He didn't smile much anymore after Ma died," he acknowledged. "But Willow changed that. She made Sarah and me laugh first, and eventually Pa couldn't help himself." As the music ended, Matthew surprised everyone, including himself, by dipping Willow low and kissing her thoroughly, to the cheers and applause of the onlookers. When he straightened, his smile was wide and unreserved. "I love you, Mrs. Zane," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "And I love you, Mr. Zane," she replied, her eyes dancing with happiness. Later that evening, as the celebration continued, Matthew found a quiet moment with his children. "Are you two ready to head home with Mrs. Pritchard?" They would be staying with the boarding house owner for a few days while Matthew and Willow had a brief honeymoon at a hotel in San Francisco. "Can't we stay a little longer, Pa?" Sarah pleaded. "I want to dance more with my new ma." The words, "my new ma," warmed Matthew's heart. "A little longer," he conceded. "But not too late. Mrs. Pritchard is doing us a favor." As the children scampered off, Catherine approached with baby Thomas in her arms. "They look so happy, Matthew, all of you do." "We are," he confirmed. "Thanks in no small part to you. If you hadn't brought Willow to Petaluma, she would have found you somehow," Catherine said confidently. "Some things are meant to be." In the years that followed, the Zane family thrived. Willow continued to teach, not just her stepchildren, but eventually a small school that grew up around Petaluma as more families settled in the area. Matthew expanded the Carson Ranch operations, earning a partnership that provided security and prosperity for his growing family. For in the spring of 1875, Willow gave birth to a son they named Nathan, after her brother. 2 years later, a daughter, Elizabeth, joined the family, a tribute to the woman who would always hold a place in their hearts. James grew into a fine young man with a talent for business that complemented his father's practical ranching skills. Sarah, with Willow's encouragement, developed her love of stories into a genuine gift for writing, her tales of frontier life eventually finding their way into magazines back east. And Matthew, the man who hadn't smiled in 3 years, became known throughout the county for his ready laugh and the obvious pride he took in his family. The sorrow never completely disappeared. There were still quiet days when he would visit Elizabeth's grave or sit in contemplative silence. But these moments were balanced by the joy he found in his second chance at happiness. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their expanded cabin watching their children play in the yard, James, now a young man of 20, Sarah 18, and pretty as a picture, 8-year-old Nathan trying to teach 5-year-old Elizabeth how to lasso a fence post, Willow leaned against Matthew's shoulder. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" she asked. "If I hadn't come to Petaluma, or if you hadn't allowed the children to attend my Sunday school class." Matthew considered this, his arm tightening around her waist. "I try not to dwell on what ifs," he said. "But I do thank God every day that you walked into our lives and refused to be deterred by my stubbornness." "You weren't stubborn," Willow protested. "You were protecting yourself and your children. That's understandable. And yet you saw through it," he pointed out. "You saw the people we could be again, when all I could see was the broken shells we'd become." "I saw people worth loving," she corrected, "and I was right." In the yard, Elizabeth let out a peal of laughter as Nathan's lasso attempt went comically awry. The sound drew a chuckle from Matthew, and Willow looked up at him with a smile of her own. "Listen to that," she said. "Your daughter has your laugh. She has your spirit," Matthew countered, "all fire and determination." "Like her namesake," Willow said softly. "Elizabeth was a fighter too, from what you've told me." Matthew nodded, grateful as always for Willow's understanding that his first wife would always be a part of their family story. She would have adored little Lizzie, and she would have been so proud of James and Sarah. "They're wonderful children, all of them," Willow agreed. "We've been blessed, Matthew." As the sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Matthew reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From the depths of grief to the heights of joy, from a man who couldn't smile to one who found reason to laugh every day, it had been a path he never could have imagined when he first rode into Petaluma with his silent, solemn children. "You know what Sarah told me yesterday?" Willow asked, interrupting his thoughts. "What's that?" She said. "She's thinking of becoming a teacher like me. She wants to help children find joy in learning." Matthew's heart swelled with pride. "She'd be excellent at it. She has your gift for bringing out the best in people." "Our gift," Willow corrected. "You sell yourself short, Matthew Zane. You've always had the capacity for great love and great joy. You just needed a reminder." As if to prove her point, little Elizabeth came running up to the porch, her face alight with excitement. Pa, did you see?" I almost caught the post with Nathan's rope. Matthew scooped his youngest into his arms, his smile wide and unreserved. I saw, my little cowgirl, you'll be out roppin' your brother in no time. Elizabeth giggled, a sound so precious that Matthew couldn't help but join in her laughter. Over the top of her head, his eyes met Willow's, and the love that passed between them was as tangible as the child in his arms. He hadn't smiled much anymore after losing his first love. But Willow had made his children giggle until, finally, inevitably, he had remembered how to smile again too. And in that rediscovered joy, he had found a life fuller and richer than he ever could have imagined.